This is Phantom Electric Ghost. We're live on the air. Here tonight is Amanda Blackwood, author, keynote speaker, podcaster for the first time. How are you doing tonight?
Fantastic. And how are you doing?
Doing great. Want to let everybody know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if you see that scrolling below, if you use coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription. Again, we are a featured podcast on that platform. And also, we want you to check out the website for those just listening. There's growthfromthedarkness.com that you'll be able to click on for those of you who watch on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch. That will be clickable. But for those who are listening, you can go to growthfromdarkness.com. Thank you again for being on the podcast. And we're actually at episode 899 of our podcast. We've been around since 2016 on Apple Podcast. That's where we're tracking that number from. But again, tonight we were going to talk about this. Is the topic that we're going to bring. Trying to bring it up right now. Is human trafficking statistics, the myth and the truth, and why the media is damaging our fight. So that's kind of like the central topic, and then we're going to use the questions that you like to answer, and we'll probably start with maybe that topic, however you want to kick it off.
I'm good with doing this whichever way you like, but I can honestly give you a ton of statistics that will instantly change your perception of what human trafficking looks like. One of the biggest ones is that most people think that human trafficking only happens to children. While that is a big problem, there's only 1/4 of all victims worldwide that are under the age of 18. So when I was trafficked 3 different times. I was trafficked at 18, 19, and 31 years old. Another question that I get quite often is, how did you allow this to happen to you 3 different times? And if you break this down into reframing it in a different way, that would be like asking a rape survivor, why did you get raped 3 different times? Didn't you learn something the first time? So reframing our thought process and understanding that human trafficking happens an average of 7 times to the same person, we can kind of understand a little bit more about what this means when we kind of dive into it and look at it. Human trafficking usually happens to people who have grown up with a sense of uncertainty and abuse in their own childhood. So we go out and search for the people who are going to give us the attention and the love that we're seeking. When we do this, we build these unhealthy relationships with people because we start to understand and believe that love cannot exist without abuse. And if somebody doesn't abuse us, if they don't scream and yell at us, if they don't hit us, that means that they don't love us. And we will leave those healthy relationships in search of something that feels less stable just because it's something that's more familiar. Less than 2% of all victims of human trafficking survive. So whenever somebody tells me that they're sorry that this happened to me, I always have to correct them and tell them that I will never be sorry for what happened to me because I survived. I walked away from it. I got out of it. If it had been anybody else in my place, and it definitely would have been, they probably wouldn't have survived. And the average lifespan of somebody in trafficking is an average of 7 years. That means if you're being trafficked at a young age, by the time you get to your 20s, you know you don't have much longer to live. Most are beaten to death. They die of a drug overdose. They commit suicide. I nearly took that route myself. And there's all these other statistics that go along with it too, but probably the biggest one is the snatch and grab scenario. When you see these posts on social media, on Facebook specifically, where people talk about how somebody was following them through the grocery store and followed them out to their car, oh my gosh, this must be human trafficking. The odds are higher that this was actually a serial rapist than a human trafficking event. Most people that are trafficked by people with a sense of authority already in their lives, people they know and trust and love, like parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. In my case, it was a boyfriend, a fiance, a man that I had known for 7 years.
Mm. So I think, that makes a lot of sense because a lot of times people get misinformation or they're confusing a serial rapist with a human trafficking situation. You said like a lot of I was a sociology major, and we did a lot of studies on criminology and societal behavior, and you could see that the patterns that happened is like the people that the closest usually were the ones that were doing the abuse. Like it wasn't like this idea the stranger comes out of nowhere, it's going to be the one that does it. Well, that's what everybody fears, and that's like
Right.
maybe that's good for politicians or certain people trying to push that scenario. But it's harder maybe to deal with the people who are close. The people who
Right.
might
I
be
mean,
part of society. They might already be established, and maybe people don't want to hear that about them or something.
exactly. So many people want to close it off and say, well, this isn't what we're seeing in the news and the media. This isn't what is in the movie Taken. When I mention human trafficking, I've had so many people ask me immediately, oh, you mean like the movie Taken? No, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And I love that you were a sociology major because it makes this conversation so much easier. You already understand so much about the way the human relationships work and why these people have this sense of authority and are able to then exploit people. I mean, the percentage of people who are kidnapped by total strangers and forced into the world of human trafficking is so minuscule. It's like 10 to 15% of all cases. And there's literally millions of cases worldwide.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of people get led down the wrong road because they have certain belief systems, or they want to believe in in this kind of other scenario. It's like it fits their paradigm. It's like some people want to fit into known paradigms to make them feel comfortable. And I think it makes people uncomfortable that it's the closest people, that it's people you have relationships with, the people that might be in your family situation, the people that might be in a church situation or some kind of spiritual situation or some kind of group that you're in. And people don't want to know that. People don't want to hear that, because then that makes them question the structures that they're in. And that becomes
Right.
like what we study, like the microcosm and the macrocosm. The idea like there's microcosmic stuff that happens, where you have this kind of bad codependency relationship, and that's what you end up expecting because that's all you know,
Right,
right?
exactly. You depend on those relationships for your own sense of stability, even though the relationships themselves are anything but stable.
And one thing
Probably
yeah, keep continue.
probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I've run across in the world of human trafficking too is that human trafficking does not equal prostitution and prostitution does not equal human trafficking. While there is a huge percentage of people in prostitution who are there by force and are being trafficked and lining somebody else's pockets with money, not everybody in prostitution, unfortunately, this broke my heart.
Mhm.
Not everybody that's in prostitution is actually being trafficked. There are some, a small percentage, around 5%, who are who are participating in the sex trade because that's where they want to be, because this is how they pay their bills and this is the most amount of money that they can make. Maybe they're poorly educated. Maybe they grew up in a household where there was severe abuse and they don't have much self-esteem and they don't believe that there's other things that they can do with their lives. And that's heartbreaking, but this is absolutely the case. And those people are not being trafficked by anybody but themselves. So in that instance, if you define human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person, that person isn't even really trafficking themselves. They're not forcing themselves into it. This is a choice. It's not fraud or coercion either.
Mhm.
But when you talk about human trafficking victims, I myself, I was never actually a prostitute, but I was definitely a victim of human trafficking. I was forced to do things that I didn't ever want to do. I was frauded into moving across the country or moving to another country to be with a person who then trafficked me. And I was coerced by being withheld food or being waterboarded for sport.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it's like the people have a hard time understanding, I think, terminology. Like because people, like they see a movie like Taken, they see popular imagery, And that's what they expect. They watch Law and Order, they watch some TV show, and so that's what they think things are without actually reading a book,
Right.
actually reading like a PhD or somebody who went and did the analysis that did or somebody has a life story and they tell it in their book, you tell it through a keynote speech like you do or through your podcast. And that I think because we have podcasts now, maybe more people are able to get your real message without having that filter, without having the gatekeepers that used to exist, that now you can get messages out. That's why I've been a podcaster, is because you can get messages out that people before might not allowed you to get these messages out because it didn't fit their paradigm, didn't fit what they want to hear or
And there's
want
so
to
many
put in.
people that have voices that need to be heard and they're not being heard, which is exactly why I have my podcast. I interview other authors who have survived trauma and then written about their own recovery experience. It's been huge for me to have this sense of community through that podcast. I've gotten to know so many incredible people. I've actually struck up some lifelong friendships with these guys. It's amazing. I'm sure you've
Yeah.
probably had the same experience where you've met somebody and just decided that you guys are going to be friends for the rest of your lives, right?
Yeah. The podcasting I started just because I'm a musician and then somebody wanted to interview me. And back in 2016, I just got pulled into it from a guy in New York that found my music. And then we started talking about music because that's what I love. I'm a producer and I'm a musician. And then I said, well, I do something I call expansive sound, which is like almost every genre. And the idea said, well, if I cross genre and I just initially talk to just artists, and I said, well, I want to talk to other people. So why can't I have a podcast that's expansive? That means I can talk to an author, I can talk to a life coach, I can talk to a mentor, I can talk to a CEO, talk to anybody I think is interesting. So that's why I started widening my podcast to include people like yourself, because I think listening to people's stories, as a musician, well, how do we end up writing? We write because we observe. We're like any author or any creative, we observe what's going on and then we write about it in a song, like a novelist writes over or any artist paints. They look at the world and then they kind of put through their lens. And I said, well, why not have a real life talk with people? And it actually helps me with my music and it helps me with connecting, because sometimes if you're just sitting in the studio, you don't connect. So you need that
Right.
human connection to talk to people. But yeah, I just think it's important to get stories out. And like you were saying, the myth breaking, because if you don't talk to people, you let people talk for you. Then what I like about the idea of a podcast is you can get the source. You can actually talk to people who've been experienced things and get their lens and get their point of view.
Right. And the whole myth busting thing is so important to me because of my own experience of figuring out that this is what had happened. And there's been people that I've talked to on my podcast who didn't realize it too. So I went to a conference, an anti-trafficking conference in 2018, because I was all about save the children from the creepy weirdos driving windowless vans, right? I'm sitting in the front row of this conference. I am excited to be there. I'm energized. I'm happy. I'm excited. And then the panel gets up and starts speaking about defining human trafficking and what it actually looks like. And my mind was blown. I could not believe what I was hearing. I was sitting there going, they're describing my life. They're describing what happened to me. This
Mm.
can't be. I wasn't kidnapped. These were people that I knew who did terrible things to me, and I was severely abused in ways that were unspeakable and I couldn't define. But they were defining them for me. So they opened up the floor to questions. And little mild, meek doormat me, I sat there in my seat and raised my hand. And they came over and they handed me the microphone. And I stood up. And what was supposed to come out of my mouth was, how long does it take for a survivor of something like this to have a normal life? But what came out of my mouth instead was, I'm a survivor? I was so terrified to say the words, and it was the first time I'd ever said it in my life. Scared the crap out of me because
Mm.
I was admitting to it. I was no longer in denial. They had opened up those doors, and suddenly I had a whole new problem that I needed to address and that I was a survivor. And since then, I've talked to many people who've gone through the same thing. When human trafficking is defined to them, they finally understand that something that they lived through, something that they experienced, was actually human trafficking, not just simply domestic violence or abuse. It's shocking how many people don't know that they are victims or survivors of human trafficking because they buy into the media hype and because they watch movies like Taken and they think that's what human trafficking looks like. I went through exactly that.
Also, it might be because if you're in that kind of codependent relationship, you don't look at the person who's putting you in that position in that light because you're looking for that stranger. You're looking for that person in the van,
Right.
not somebody that you know, right? Somebody that you have a connection with. Just because you have a connection doesn't mean it's a good connection. But
Right.
I think a lot of times people are scared. What I've talked about in this podcast a lot is fear and how much fear stops people. How
Oh
much
my
fear
gosh.
puts ceilings on, from anywhere from a CEO to an artist to someone anybody. Like if you have fear, then you don't actually speak things out. You don't actualize things. So you keep things in, and you don't even want to discuss it with yourself in the mirror. And I
Right.
think I think what I've seen is people who break through, that have that crucible moment, are the people who actually finally actually speak what is going on. They speak like the truth to the situation, right? So, did you have like a crucible moment where you like realized your own truth?
Well, it was definitely that moment in 2018, but it still needed a little bit of time to really truly sink in. When I think that moment really struck like a baseball bat upside the head was in 2019 when I found out that the man who had trafficked me back in 2011 had made me recently famous on a pornography website by putting up photos and videos of me being trafficked multiple times all over these porn sites. When
Mm,
he did this, he included contact information for me where people could find me on social media, my social security number, my telephone
wow.
number, my old home address, because he didn't have my current home address. All of this stuff was up there, and I found out about it, and it absolutely tore me to pieces, but probably that crucible moment was shortly after I discovered this and was trying to find help on how do I fight this. Somebody recognized me in a grocery store.
Oh wow.
That was humiliating. That was this moment in my life where I said, I have been trying to hide and have a normal life for 8 years, and he has never stopped hunting me. I'm done. It was in 2019 that I finally got the counseling and therapy that I desperately needed and didn't realize and didn't want to admit that I needed. I got in touch with an anti-trafficking organization that helps to pair survivors with legal practices that are willing to do pro bono work to help them, an organization called Alight. They were able to help me start going after these pornography websites and have this stuff pulled down. But every time one went down, two more went up. It was
Mm,
going to be a never ending fight. And I'm fighting it to this day. People still find me from pornography websites. So that was when I decided that I was going to write my book. It took me a little while to really start it and to get into it. But in December of 2020, I sat down and started and finished my entire 350-page autobiography of my entire life and what led up to the trafficking and all that stuff. I was completely done with it by the end of the month of December, and it was published in June of 2021. Now, when the book came out, of course, at first I was absolutely terrified. People are going to know the truth about me. People are going to judge me. They're going to say that I was a prostitute or any number of other things. And a lot of that came from my own sense of guilt and my own sense of shame. But you're right, that fear was ruling my life right then. But I refused to allow it. I fought back against it so hard. And in July, the very next month, is when I met my husband.
wow. I think when you own it, like so if people go to that growthfromdarkness.com, is that how they can get the book?
Yes, they can find the links to be able to go get all of my books there. But the Growth from Darkness book series, I have the first book on the stages of trauma here. I have number 2 in the works, which is going to be trauma reactions, what the long-term consequences are of not dealing with them and how to fight back. Next year, I'll be releasing books 3 and 4, which are going to be the books about healthy boundaries and how to support a survivor.
So at your website, I know you're an author and you're a public speaker. Do you have any kind of programs like life coaching or mentoring beyond the books? Like, do you go to like conventions or author conventions or speaking conventions where you talk these topics?
I do do a lot of anti-trafficking events. I have not done a bunch of author events. The majority of author events are more focused on people who write fiction or science fiction and that kind of stuff. Most
Mhm.
people at author conventions write and appreciate the world of writing because they want to escape from reality. And what I have is a very heavy dose of reality.
It's too much reality. Yeah, yours is more like it would seem like it is you need to have part of a whole, I don't know what you call it, when you're a life coach and you actually go through teaching about an issue or teaching about a situation. It's more of like a teaching moment or an explanation of the crisis, you know, of actually going through this. And so it seems it's a different audience. It's a more
Right.
tailored audience that probably wants to find out about this issue of trafficking. So I would
Right.
think, yeah. So you
And
probably have to go to conventions people who are putting on events that are focused on this topic specifically, right?
right. And a lot of trauma recovery seminars and stuff. So I do speak at a lot of international summits and stuff. The international summits these days are typically geared towards women empowerment or overcoming your fears or
Hmm.
recovering from traumas and not letting your traumas hold you back and that kind of stuff. I do have a trauma recovery mentorship program that I offer to people. And I do also I'm working on a uh, modular series of videos, kind of coaching people through that. And when somebody later on, when it's ready, when somebody purchases that program, it's going to include one-on-one mentorship with me also.
Oh, so it's kind of like a master class type of thing.
Right, exactly. For trauma recovery and for identifying what your triggers are and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things I've found in the last couple of years of being a podcaster in the last 2 years is that's where it's been a lot of growth in people becoming mentors and having master classes and having programs where they can actually address issues and deal with things head on. And I think that I think that's the part of the whole idea is when you fight that fear and you take it on, then things open up. You know, like being an artist, like the day you decide you become an artist, the day you decide that you're going to be honest and kind of open yourself up to criticism, because as soon as you create something when you're an artist, you get critics because like,
Yes.
and a lot of people are scared to actually do that, and they won't ever sing outside the shower because like they don't want to take what people are going to say. But once you get into that space, and I used to always think, oh, it's just artists, but then I find there's like mentors and life coaches and people like yourself that have to get beyond that fear and do something beyond just creative work as a musician or photographer or actor.
Right.
There's that truth of overcoming the fear to actually tell the story.
And, I've been all of those routes too. So when I was in my 20s, I modeled for Harley Davidson. I was on the TV shows Will and Grace and Alias. I did a lot of really fun and interesting things. At the time, I didn't see them as things that people would be afraid of. I saw it as this is the next fun adventure. But
Mm.
after having survived everything that I survived, my brain kind of went in a different direction. I had built these new neural pathways about being not good enough and about being judged by other people. So when I wrote my book and I was terrified of being judged by that, right after I got done writing my book, my therapist asked me what I was going to do next. And I said, I didn't know. So she said, why don't you try painting? So I became an artist. She had somebody bring over paintbrushes and paints and canvases and everything that I would need. And I started painting. Within 3 months, I sold my first painting. But the only reason I sold it was because I shared it on social media to my small network of friends. And it was a friend of mine who runs an anti-trafficking organization that ended up purchasing the painting. And it started to build my confidence. So when we're going through this fear of success and this fear of being judged by the whole world, I think one of the things that can help to fight that is to have this healthy network of people around us that are going to boost us up, but also tell us the truth. If my painting was garbage, I needed somebody to tell me that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like when I talk to writers, they have beta groups or like writing groups where before they usually break out is they test their work on these beta people or other authors before
Right.
they ever push it out. And the same thing happens with painters and musicians. We have networks of other musicians and we say, hey, listen to my demo. Am I
Right.
doing, is this going the right way? It was like, should I continue this? Should I not? So whether you got it or you don't. But you still at some point, like I listen to what people say, and then like I say, well, you know what? I still like it. I'm still gonna put it out.
and
'Cause-
and the beauty of doing that sometimes too is that you're doing this with a group of your peers. If they can think of some way that you can improve this, they're going to tell you. They're going to be honest with you. And we don't need a bunch of yes men sitting around us guiding us to crash and burn with a massive failure. We need people that are going to support us by offering advice.
yeah, constructive criticism rather than the hater. Because
Right.
a lot of people get scared of the hater. Because I mean, when you're in elementary school, you got all the people don't want to raise their hand because they want to look like they're I don't want to be a nerd or I don't want to be this, I don't want to be that. And then it starts, the bullying. And people start getting into these frames and they don't realize until later. I talked to a lot of people, like they really wanted to do something, but they let everybody else's opinion control what they were going to do. Because
Right.
they're like they can't get beyond trying to be popular. It's like sometimes like in order to get out there, you're gonna be a little unpopular. If you
Oh
do
yeah.
something different, it's not gonna be something that is expected. It's something that's gonna cause some problems. Usually, when you first come out, it's like it's hard. It's hard to actually be yourself and not be part of the overall crowd because like that's easy to just conform. You know,
I
it's
had
harder to actually be willing to say the truth.
Yeah. I think I had a little bit of an advantage there. I grew up being anything but popular. I was a complete social outcast in school and had basically no friends. So when you grow up like that, you're already rejected by society.
Mm.
And I had this advantage of I'm already rejected, so I might as well try it.
So you're willing to try things, but then it's just a bad codependent situation to put you, in on the track of finding, that you said like at the beginning that people find kind of reinforcement for their insecurity. They
Right.
they go to the people that are not good for them, because it
Right.
makes them feel like, well, okay, that's what I expect.
Right, exactly. They treat me exactly how XYZ treated me. They treat me how my parents treated me. This is a normal relationship. It's ugly.
Now, one of the things you were talking about that was interesting that I'm going to bring up is the anti-trafficking organizations that you shouldn't work with. So a lot of people would think like, oh, if there's an anti-traffic organization, I should go check it out. But that seems to suggest that you really need to check out like what the organization is. And not all anti-traffic organizations are what they seem. So maybe you can
Right.
expand on what that is.
So there's some anti-trafficking organizations that raise money and then pocket the money. And the reason they what they're doing is they say that they're educating people on the dangers of human trafficking. Really what they're doing is they are taking the stories of survivors and spreading it along, trying to garner sympathy for the cause. And people don't realize where their dollars are going to. they're going to privately funded organizations that don't have any kind of discrepancy or visibility as
Mm,
to where they're spending the money. So they're spending money on large offices and having people come in and work for them, and it's kind of a shell.
mm,
It's important to understand which organizations are actually going out and doing the hard work. I mentioned Alight earlier. They do wonderful things. They bend over backwards, basically, to be able to pair up survivors of trafficking with legal representation. This can be to prosecute the trafficker or to get legal housing, or in my case, to fight the pornography websites and have this stuff pulled down. Because here's another random statistic for you: more than 85% of all pornography is created using victims of human trafficking. They're forced into it, they're frauded into it, or they're coerced.
oh wow. So a lot of people are like they get into the industry and then they get bad contracts or they get locked into it for
Right.
whatever reason. They get locked into it, and they're just like, if you're coerced illegally and you sign a contract, you're still coerced.
Oh,
Doesn't
right.
matter if it's like people
Absolutely.
say, "Oh, you signed a contract." Well, we could talk a lot about a lot of musicians that sign contracts and they were totally ripped off.
Right. And
It's just like, and
it's a
you
coercion
end
to
up
get
working
them
for
there.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a coercion to get them there. And then it's a fraud because they break this phony contract that never really existed in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, that's terrible. Because like
Yeah.
that's the thing. And people get, a lot of people don't have the skill to understand what they're signing for.
Right.
A lot of people get signed up for all kinds of things, and just like, well, how do you, it's cool they mentioned the organization, the light, or that was
Yeah,
it's called the light.
Alight, ALIGHT, I believe. But if you put in ALIGHT and then the keywords human trafficking, you should be able to figure out ways to be able to donate to them if you're looking for an organization to donate to. They're my organization of choice right now. There's another one called Beautiful Feet Wellness. This survivor led organization actually takes other survivors on retreats, and they do these bonding exercises, and they are amazing. There's another one called Compass 31 down in Colorado Springs. They do good work. But one of the most famous ones is one of the worst. So, pretty much everybody out there that's familiar with human trafficking and the fight against human trafficking is familiar with a group called Operation Underground Railroad. Have you ever
Hmm.
heard of them?
I think I heard of them at one point.
It's run by a Navy SEAL by the name of Tim Ballard. And Tim Ballard, when I first found out about the organization, I was head over heels. I loved it. I loved everything that they did. I wanted to know a lot more. I went and met Tim Ballard, shook his hand, thanked him for what he did. And then I found out the truth. He was taking the stories of survivors and spreading them along, like the other organizations, in order to garner sympathy for his cause so that more people would throw more money into this fight. Not all of the money goes into the actual effort to get people out of trafficking. He only focuses on children, which is of course another stereotype that is harming the overall fight and making people believe it only happens to children. But he also lives in a multi-million dollar mansion down in San Diego, and I guarantee the Navy SEALs didn't pay him that well. Where do you think
Mhm.
that money's coming from?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of other questions that have come up about this organization too in recent years.
Yeah, I think that's always a problem when you give to organizations that you want to say, well, what's the percentage that's going to the bureaucracy versus the percentage that's actually going to actually solve the problem? Like, so
Right.
like if you had like 90% of the money goes to my office or my
Right.
expenses and 10% goes to the cause, like that seems kind of off.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that you start asking, like, I want to know how much of my donation actually goes to support people who are human trafficked. Like if I'm a cancer
Right.
survivor, so if I want to give the cancer organization, I want to know how much of that money actually goes to the cancer patients to pay
Right.
their doctor bills versus how much is going to some administrative office to keep the building lights on. Well, why
Yeah.
do you need that building? Maybe you don't need it. maybe you should have something that's like less extravagant. Um, yeah, a lot of people are starting to question that with all kinds of charities because like they pull you in and it's across the board. It's like
Oh
why
yeah.
yeah, it's not right to they take people's money thinking that it's going the lion's share is going to the cause and when it's not. That's not cool.
I think the average 501c3 charitable organization only sends about 3% of all the money that they make to the actual fight that they claim that they're fighting.
Yeah.
This is just a ridiculous number. And you got to think about some of these cancer organizations that are putting up this expensive advertising all over TV. The Susan G. Komen Foundation, they go out and they're raising awareness and fighting breast cancer, right? But you see their advertisements everywhere. How much do you think they're spending on those advertisements?
Yeah, it just seems like a little out of whack. It's like why do you have to their budgets are just no, it's just a question where people are starting to like challenge because we can challenge people as to what are you doing? you
Right.
know, like and if you actually believe in the fight, like why don't you actually do the fight?
Right,
But
exactly. Stop talking about fight and go out there and fight.
yeah. So I think like you talked about like healing in your from your trauma is like art therapy part of it. I mean, I would think there's a lot of things, not this one thing. But, like, a
There's so
lot of
much.
people yeah, there's probably a lot of different, avenues is, like, when you start to wanna heal from it, you how do you approach that?
There's a number of different ways that you can approach it. For me, early on, it took the form of writing. So I've got, as of June 1st, it'll be 13 books to my name. My cookbook comes out on June 1st. But writing and free writing is a style of writing where you explore what you're feeling right now, what's happened to make you feel this way, and then try to connect it to other times in your past that you have felt in similar ways, and see if you can find a way to connect it to something in your past so you can more understand why it is that this has triggered these certain emotions in you. This is a kind of a lesser form of a very popular therapy called EMDR. And I did EMDR. It's just phenomenal therapy, but this is kind of a way to start breaking yourself into that idea of the association of feelings with different things in the past. That was hugely helpful for me. The art therapy kind of took over after I had already done the talk therapy with a counselor, with a therapist. And I will say that I had this real problem when I first started going to see a therapist. I was trauma vomiting, is what I call it. It's where you just throw everything out there and they've got a mile and a half of mess that they have to wade through. And I'm pretty sure I terrified and traumatized my first therapist so much that she left the industry. She didn't know how to deal with it. She had never talked to somebody who had been through the stuff that I had been through.
Oh, so it's kinda like you just have a faucet, it goes like overload, like too much all at once?
Yep. Yep, I drowned her basically. That poor woman. So my second therapist was really great. She had already worked with several survivors of trafficking, and she worked with survivors that hadn't quite gone and progressed on their own as much as I had been able to through my own writing exercise and through exploring how the human mind works and my ever desire to learn more about trauma. I had done so much research on my own that it was really helpful for her. She was very cut and dry. She didn't worry about where the eggshells were, much less walking on them. And she told it like it was. She pulled no punches. That
Mhm.
at the time was exactly what I needed. And I tell people all the time that when it comes to therapy, you're not going to like every single person that you meet. So you shouldn't be expected to like the first therapist that you meet either. If you're
Mhm.
sticking with a therapist because you have a sense of loyalty to them or because you think that they're going to be upset with you if you leave them, just know that that is a trauma reaction. You have to fight back against it and find a therapist who's actually going to help you, or all you're going to do is either regress or stay the same. And those are not good options in therapy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have trouble when they get to a doctor or they get to a therapist, and if they don't like them, and like, you gotta be honest, like, I don't like this doctor's approach. what should I like? Oh, I'm scared of what if I leave? No, like if somebody doesn't fit, they don't fit. Like
Right.
every human being's different. Like one, like it is like you have to be willing to kind of assess it and not fall into that thing where like, oh, accept it. Like if you start to accept something that you don't really like, then where are you putting yourself back into a cycle where like you're putting yourself in because you should expect that somebody that's going to be a good fit.
Right.
And that might not be the first person. You know, it's like when you're in a band, you can find the first group of people. It's like, is that gonna be the right fit? Probably not. You know, it's like you got to find who's going to work. You know, and
Right.
sometimes you have to find out or do you have a synergy? Do you not? It's kind of easy with art. It's like, yeah, that guy don't have the feel. They don't. You know, I don't. If I don't, if I always like, if I don't have to say what key I'm in, if they just pick up what I'm doing, then like, yeah, that's it. Like then it's kind of like the nonverbal communication because they're actually listening. Because like with music, it's like you gotta listen if people start connecting and they hear each other and then they feed back on each other and you hear the product of it is like it's harmonious. Then you're like, yeah, that's working. If
Right.
it's not harmonious, then it's not working.
And your mental health is every bit as important as your physical health. You know, I mean, in 2021, was it 2022? They discovered a lump on my throat. I went in for a biopsy. They discovered that it was not thyroid cancer, thank goodness, but it was thyroid disease. And my
Mm,
doctor, my primary doctor, said, "Well, we'll just, it's not life threatening, so you're good.
that's
We'll
it.
monitor it once a year." And it's like, wait a second. I'm having these problems with fatigue and with weight gain and all this huge laundry list of things that were all directly linked to having thyroid disease. I wanted to
Thyroid.
know, I
Mm.
wanted to fix it. And she said, "Well, if you keep complaining about it, we can just have it pulled out." So
Oh,
you better
geez.
believe I
It's
went
like
and
all
found
or
an
nothing.
endocrinologist and a brand new primary care provider.
Yeah, you have some doctors that just all or nothing, or they don't want to look at the holistic approach. You know, it's like I
Yeah,
think it's maybe how they get trained. They like, oh, it's like this. It's like, oh, is this? You, you take it out. Well,
right.
why don't you look at like a holistic solution? You know, but I think that's not everybody's purview. May not be the way they're trained. It's like, well, you find the person that's going to fit. Like I had cancer, and when I was
Mhm.
27 years old, and the first doctor I went to wanted to put me into a test on a drug that could have been like 50-50 shot that I was getting a placebo when I had a level 3 sarcoma. And I'm like, I don't want to be in some research group. I want to know what you're giving me is going to get rid of the cancer. And you're telling me there's a 50% shot that I'm getting a sugar pill and it's not doing anything against this sarcoma at all. And so why would I do that? So I immediately went to another doctor and actually got somebody that actually took care of it. And I'm still here. I was
Wow.
27, but if I wasn't paying attention, and I had to say, well, they're the doctor, they know what they're saying, and I didn't research what you have to do a little bit of work
Right.
because some people will just listen to what somebody tells them and
Yeah.
not question it. And I think what is you learn as a human being, like you got to question things
Yep.
because if you don't, like somebody could be messing you up.
You got to learn to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be, if you advocate for yourself, you're going to be the best person to do that.
Yeah, I think it's real important to understand that, because a lot of times, like, no one else is gonna be your advocate.
Right.
Like, a lot of times you have to be the one that does it first, and then maybe you find help. But,
Yep.
like, until you actually decide, "I'm not gonna take this, I deserve better," I deserve better for myself. So a lot of times
Right.
it's like what I've seen with people is, like, they don't love themselves, and, like, if you don't solve that, you're not gonna solve anything else.
Right. You have to learn how to respect yourself. You have to learn how to have those healthy boundaries. Yeah. And you have to learn what it is that you're willing to have in your life and where you draw the line. And having a doctor tell me, well, if you're going to keep complaining about it, I knew as soon as those words came out of her mouth, she didn't even have to say, we'll just pull it out. I already knew I'm done with this doctor. I'm never going to see her again. Time for a new primary care provider, and I need an endocrinologist now.
Yeah. It's kind of like when they want to put me in a test. I'm like, I don't want to be in the test.
Right. No thanks. How about you actually work on and do the job
Yeah,
of
actually get
trying
rid
to
of
get rid
this.
of this?
Yeah, actually solve the cancer. Don't put me in this theoretical solving it.
How many years you been cancer free now?
Since I'm age 55, I was 27 when I had a level 3 sarcoma on my back.
Wow.
So I survived that, and it's it's really because I had to pay attention. And the weird thing is like when I got cancer, there was people around me that got scared because they were young. We were young. And what
Right.
I found is that the other young people around me started getting scared of their own mortality, and I lost some friends. They could not handle being around somebody. And it's not like that you can catch cancer, but I think it's the idea that somebody that's young could have that. Some people can't handle the
Well,
idea of
and
it.
this goes back to allowing the fears to run your life too. These people are afraid they're going to lose you. So instead of waiting until they lose you, they're just going to go ahead and cut you off so they don't have to go through that pain later on. They're terrified that they're going to lose you. So they go ahead and push you away.
Yeah, that was a really eye-opening thing. And then I was
Yeah.
like, wow, that actually happens.
Yeah. And,
It's like,
I've seen it happen at every age too.
yeah,
I had
that's
a
weird.
really good friend of mine who passed away from pancreatic cancer just last year in April. And up until he got his first diagnosis of pancreatic cancer 6 years before that. When he got that first diagnosis, most of his friends just kind of dropped off the face of the planet. He had very few friends remaining. And most of those friends knew that he wasn't going to be long for this earth, but they didn't care. They loved him anyway. They adored this man. He was an amazing human being. I miss him terribly. He was one of my best friends. But they all knew that he needed that close network of people. So they stuck with him. And it was a beautiful thing seeing this. But the rest of the people that didn't want anything to do with him just because he had
Hmm.
cancer, he had this way about him where he just didn't care. You know what? If that's the way you're going to be, you were never my friend to begin with. You were there for convenience. I learned a lot from that guy.
Yeah, that's the way I had to look at it that way. Yeah, you
Yeah.
find out who's a real friend, who's not. And then
And
you're
that's
like,
so
wow.
hard when you're
And then you just
27.
realize how people are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah,
I,
that is like it was kind of like to me, it was a big moment for me because it's where I decided to get out of my shell. Because it's like because something so traumatic happened, I was willing before the cancer, I was not somebody that would talk on the mic. I was a musician that would stay in the back. I'd never sing my own song. I'd write a song, give it to somebody else. I'd never be in the front at all. After that, I started going and being willing to face my fear of being in front of the mic, being the guy singing the song that wrote the song, and doing podcasting and stuff like that. So it ended up being something where I kind of like thank the cancer for opening up my life to different possibilities and get beyond my glass ceiling because if I probably would have just stayed there because it was comfortable.
yeah. Yep. I was the same way with being in hiding for so many years. And when the whole thing with the pornography website happened, it broke something in my brain and it changed me. And that little tiny little mouse voice of me saying, I'm a survivor, it changed into this lion wanting out of my lungs. It changed
Yeah,
me.
I think change is good, but some people are so scared to change. Some people
Right.
will stay in the box. Like
I
they'll
was
just stay.
definitely, yeah, I was definitely one of those. I was terrified of change, but when it came to that moment, I was more terrified of things not changing.
Mm. Yeah, that's when you get to that pressure point where what's gonna break you out of the box, because eventually there's a point where you get this like diminishing returns from being comfortable.
Right?
Right? If you keep on like it's not comfortable anymore. Like it starts to get uncomfortable, the comfort of like, doing the same thing that's not moving you forward. And
Right.
then that's when you make the decision that like, hey, I can't stay there anymore, even though it seemed comfortable. I got to open that door. I got to get out of this cage. I got to break out of it because it's actually not. I'm not moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you celebrate wins in your life?
There's so many beautiful things now. At one time when I had a win in my life, when something went my way, when something was worth celebrating, I refused to celebrate it because I felt like that was being selfish. But since everything has kind of changed for me, I've learned that it's important to celebrate those little things. I have a new book coming out June 1st. Rather than cooking my own meal, even though this is a cookbook, I'm going to go out to dinner that night. My husband and I are going to go out and have a nice steak dinner to celebrate this book release coming out. And in my weight loss journey, one of the things I've learned is that we should not necessarily reward ourselves with food because we're not dogs and we don't need to be trained this way. But I'm going to do it anyway because it's about food. And food is a huge part of my life. So the book is called Surviving in the Kitchen: Recipes for Life, Love, and a Full Stomach. So it kind of talks a little bit about the trauma and coming through the trauma and learning how to be creative. And in all of that, food is so important to me. It is my love language. This is how I show people that I love them and I care for them, is I'll make them a loaf of banana bread for Christmas, or zucchini bread, or pumpkin bread for a birthday, special things like that. But I also love to just take a day off, sleep in a little. It's like this morning, I'm normally up at 7:00 on the nose. Every morning I've got an alarm set. I turned off my alarm and rolled over and went back to sleep. And that's how I celebrated just being alive today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because some people, I deal with a lot of artists, and sometimes they'll be like in this kind of dark place, and they kind of celebrate that kind of darkness. I mean, I kind of look at like being a cancer survivor. I'm just happy every day I'm up, I'm walking around.
Right. We're still alive.
And I get these people like they're so in the down. It's like, like there's only so many places you can go. You can end up going like, be like the 28 Club, or you can end up being like what happened to Kurt Cobain. It's like you get into the down spiral. The downward spiral is not a hip thing. It's like maybe you can use that to create something, but are you going to stay there to create something? The way I look at it is I like to do something that's like more elevating.
Right.
Not that it's bad. I don't know if that's where your art comes from, but like, think about what you're presenting in the world. Because I'm a Buddhist, like if you put negative energy, then you draw negative energy. If you put positive energy, it kind of creates positive energy. I mean, it's like kind of our belief, the law of cause and effect. So it's like, you can do that, but there's a consequence to putting out so much negativity, then it kind of draws negativity.
Yeah. And I used to be an extremely negative person. Up until I was in my mid-20s, I was a pessimist. I was Debbie Downer with everything. And I think it had a lot to do with having gone through as much trauma as I did. But there was one day that I heard a speaker on a radio program, and I wish I knew who the speaker was. He was just a guest on the radio. And he talked about how he was the same way. And one day he woke up and he said, "You know what? I'm tired of being miserable all the time. I need to make a change." So he started retraining his brain. Every morning when he woke up, he reminded himself that he was happy, that he was still alive. And he started trying to find more and more things to be grateful for every day. And instead of being this ever pessimist, he started being quite optimistic about life. And he noticed a personality change in himself. He decided every day if he was going to be miserable or happy, regardless of circumstance, regardless of what's going on, even through a divorce and his parents getting sick. He decided every single day that he was grateful to be alive, and it helped him to get through the really dark, really hard times. But when things were good, they were exceptionally good. And I learned from that day, and I started trying to do the same thing. And I have completely changed my entire outlook on life. I'm now very much an optimist. My husband claims that he's a realist, so we kind of balance each other out a bit.
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with like affirmations too, because like being an artist, we take what's in our head and we make it real. As
Right.
when a song actually is something that's in my head, it was a dream, and then it becomes something that's like a real thing. And so when you take a lot of what the idea of being a musician is that you can take all the things that are kind of like I don't know, stream of consciousness of what you experience and then turn it into a piece of art. And it might be that you are feeling blue. You're feeling melancholy like a Karen Carpenter blue, right? Or you're feeling like a Miles Davis kind of jazz blue, bebop blue, or maybe you feel funky. Maybe you feel like Parlor and Funkadelic, and you're happy, you want to dance. You do something that's like disco or funk, you know. So like what I found is like, well, what if I do more funk or disco or kind of upbeat soul? Then you kind of have this happy feel, like a James Brown happy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
if you come from that perspective, it's like, well, what if I have that kind of beats infectious? It kind of makes me happy all day. If I get into that mindset, you think about Stevie Wonder. He did all these elevation type of songs. Like there were all these very spiritually elevating of humanity, not negative. You know, trying to push forward. Like if you have that kind of mindset, it's wow, that's very it's like, wow, that's very forward thinking, it's very, upbeat, but it's very sophisticated in its execution. So you can still be serious. You don't say, well, if you're happy all the time, that's not serious. Because some people will say, well, that's corny. It doesn't have to be corny. Yeah.
If anybody ever comes to me and say that my happiness is corny, I will just remind them of where I came from. Excuse me, but I'm happy to be alive. If you're going to call that corny, I probably don't need you around me.
Yeah, it's everybody's perspective. But yeah, I think it's just important to kind of, understand yourself, understand how to love yourself and how to move forward. I think it's great that you're explaining to people about the myths about human trafficking, because a lot of people, like you said at the beginning, they go see a movie like Taken, or they go watch some TV show and they think it's the person in the van grabbing some unknown person, and it's actually what we've been talking about. It's a lot of times it's people that are very close to you, you
Right.
know, in codependent or bad relationship type of situations, and people aren't expecting that, and they didn't even know they were being human trafficked, like you explained. You then you realize when you define it, people can actually realize where they've been.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The last time I did a public speaking engagement, not that long ago, just a couple weeks, was down in Arizona. And when I first walked out on stage, I did kind of a mental count of how many people were in the audience. And when I stepped up on stage, it was kind of a smaller audience. When I stepped up on stage, I told them, I said, when I define what human trafficking looks like, there's going to be somebody out here who is going to recognize for the first time in their life that they were also a victim of human trafficking. And when I was looking at the audience, I thought I figured out who that person might be. There was a young
Mm,
lady in the audience that was covered in tattoos and had on a very pretty dress and a hat that kind of shaded her eyes, almost like she was trying to hide.
mm.
It was not that person. It was a woman in her 60s who approached me afterward and said, I never knew that what my parents did to me was called human trafficking.
Wow. Like you never know, because like people don't always display what the real situation is,
Yeah.
you know.
And people don't always know. I mean, just recently I was having a conversation with somebody who said, Gosh, you're the first human trafficking survivor that I've ever talked to. And I had to remind him that you know of.
Yeah, you might not realized.
Yeah.
'Cause
Of
what
the 2% that of the 2% of us that actually survive, very few are willing to talk about it because there is an incredible amount of guilt and personal shame for what it is that we've been through. And I got to the point where I realized that what happened to me was not my own fault. And I was fighting back against it as hard as I could at the time, but it still took me months to be able to get away. Yeah. Knowing that I did everything that I could in that moment, knowing that I was forced and coerced and frauded into doing things that I didn't want to do, I was able to let go of that guilt and that shame a little bit quicker than some people because I had that drive in me to continually fight. A lot of people don't have that drive to fight all the time. Every moment of every day when they wake up, they're not thinking about what's my escape plan.
Yeah, they might just be thinking about a survival plan without thinking about escaping.
Right.
You know,
And that's
is
the
this the kind?
majority of people.
Yeah, that's the problem because if you get into this like day to day and you're not thinking about what could I do next week, what could I get, planning a way to get out, the escape route. But if you're
Right.
just dealing with the day to day,
Yep.
minute
And
to
that's where a
minute,
lot of the root of this guilt comes from.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
seems like it's very enlightening, and I do encourage people to check out growthfromdarkness.com and sign up for any of the mentoring that if you feel you need that, and maybe you're offering that, people might have been triggered from this conversation to actually pursue it, and I think you should, and because that's the point of this discussion, is to get people to think about things maybe they weren't thinking about, and reframe things. That's the whole point of having like a conversation. So I think it's been great to have you on the show, on the Family Electric Go show. You've been a great um, um, guest to enlighten people about human trafficking. And I think it's just very important for people to look into this deeper. And if they could start from your website and go where that leads them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation. This has gone a little bit differently than most of my interviews, and I'm really excited to start sharing this with folks.
Oh, thank you. Well, I like to have a conversational kind of style. It's my kind of freeform
Yeah.
jazz style podcasting.
It's beautiful and it's so heartfelt that way.
Yeah, I tried to do things from at the beginning of my podcast career. I try to control it, and it's like, well, I'm not good at doing edited podcast. I was like, I'd rather just do a real conversation with a person, and I think I'm better at doing it that way. And so I just made a decision after the first 10 or 15 episodes, like, nah, that doesn't work for me. I changed to this style, and I just stuck with it.
Well,
So
you're darn good at it.
thank you. Have a great night, and I do appreciate everything that you've talked about. And people can check this out everywhere. I will have these links on a landing page. I will give that to your audience, and they can check it out on whatever platform they like. Thank you again
Fantastic.
for being on the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you so much.